Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this wonderful Valentine's Day for our webinar about serving male survivors. This is Kelly at WCASA. We have a big crew here in our training room with WCASA staff as well as some of our speakers, and a few of our speakers are joining us remotely. So we're crossing our fingers that all the managing the tech with all of that goes okay. We have Peter here who's going to be handling any tech issues that you have. If you have a hard time hearing us or anything, any tech issues, please go ahead and use either that, it'll either show as a chat box or a question box depending on which version of GoToMeeting you're using. So if you will use that box and type in any tech questions or issues that you have for Peter, we'll do our best to take care of those as we go along. You can also use that question or chat box to ask questions of our speakers. So again, we'll be monitoring those. Don't worry if we don't get to it right away. We've got a system here of trying to decide if we'll interrupt the speaker or save them for the end. So if you have questions, please feel free to use the question or chat box to send those in. So I think that was about it. So we're going to dive in because we've got 4 great speakers with us today, and we're going to be scrunched, I'm sure, a little bit on time. So hang with us. And I want to first of all thank all of our speakers for joining us, and I will introduce them each as we go along through. So first up, we have Gina Souza, who's with UNIDOS here in Madison, and Gina's here in the room with us, so we're just gonna turn it over to Gina. Thanks, Gina.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I have a PowerPoint. Well, I'm Gina Souza with UNIDOS Against Domestic Violence based here in Madison. I'm the sexual assault domestic violence advocate. So today I'm going to present you about working with Latino men survivors. And first I have some facts about male sexual abuse. So boys and men can be victims of sexual abuse and rape. Most sexual abuse of boys is not perpetrated by homosexual males. A boy or adult male can experience an erection, sexual arousal, and even orgasm from abusive contact without being a willing participant or even enjoying it. Boys can be significantly traumatized by sexual abuse, and it is clear that boys and men will experience sexual victimization at much higher rates than is commonly presumed. 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused in childhood, and 1 out of 4 of every 4 males will experience some form of sexual abuse. Other facts that I have up here, females can and do perpetrate sexual abuse. Male survivors of child abuse delay disclosure for over 20 years on average, and boys and men are victims of sexual exploitation or human trafficking too. Next we have barriers that prevent the Latino males victim to report. Here we have masculinity. It is culturally known that men are viewed as a strong gender, and men don't cry. They're not supposed to show emotions. They have to express sexuality. And since childhood, families tend to educate boys on how to behave, act, and think. You're a boy and you must show interest in girls only. And what we see in the Latino community is that since they're growing, we always tend to tell boys, you're not allowed to cry. If you cry, you're acting like a girl. You're not supposed to play with dolls. You're not supposed to wear pink. You're not supposed to play with girls. You're supposed to play only with boys. You have to like cars. So we always have those rules that we set up for our own kids or our own men in our family. One of the reasons Latino men would not report, in the Latino community, we're extremely close to our families. What happens when men experience sexual assault, they feel ashamed. They feel that they bring some shame to the family. And if the perpetrator is in the family, that would divide the support that each one can receive. This means that if one of our cousin or brother disclose the sexual assault, they will feel that they're gonna like divide the family, and what is the other person going to think about me, or are they going to believe me? So sometimes they just do not talk about it, and it's a very common thing in the Latino community not to report sexual abuse, especially in men. Another barrier is the immigration or law enforcement. When children tell their parents what happened to them, parents might be scared of reporting the crime because of the immigration, because of their legal status. Another barrier is the language. Not being able to communicate in their own language can prevent the report. And it is extremely difficult for a man to report sexual assault to another man, especially law enforcement. Oftentimes, law enforcement people are not very sensitive to the crime as they are to women. So for a man to report this, it's very hard for them. We have clients only wanting to talk to us, but when we ask them if they want to make the report, they say, no, I don't know how they're going to look at me. They're going to think I'm weak, I'm not enough man, I couldn't stop it. So that's one of the reasons they don't report to law enforcement. Here I have how to work with Latino male survivors. As a sexual assault advocate with UNIDOS Against Domestic in Dane County, I have had the pleasure of facilitating a few male survivors groups, as well as providing one-on-one advocacy counseling. We have our group called Proyecto Dignidad, which was launched 2 years ago. One of the greatest joys I have had working with men is seeing that they have the same alive emotions as women. Our culture seems to say that males across the board are hesitant to express emotion. My experience has been refreshing and showed me that vulnerabilities, when given a safe space to be freely and honestly expressed, can have a healing aspect that enables all humans to be washed and renewed with getting to the deep of their pain. Recruiting members for male groups is an enormous challenge for which I like to find a solution. As we know, males do not come forward for support as frequently as females, and for us to provide support groups for them has been very, very hard. Like, we tried everything we can. We put flyers everywhere. We go to YWCA, we go to gyms, everywhere we can reach out. We send letters to those professionals informing them of the groups, their purpose. We do send some statistics on sexual assault and some of the negative effects on a person's life, and then the many benefits of accessing support. The response does not by any means match the numbers of clients that seek services, but it does offer an opportunity for men to work, for men who are in the stage of their process to come forward when they're ready. One frustration is holding a prospective group member on the waiting list for a couple months before the group is full enough to begin. Sometimes we only have 2 men, so it's very hard for us to just start the group with 2, and then they will come once, and then they want to show up for the next session. So for us to get 6 or 7 men in the room, it's very hard. But I can say that 2 years ago, we launched our first men's conference, and we had 11 men attending. So it was a great turnout. During this period when they're waiting to participate in group, those men are invited to take advantage of ongoing advocacy as another effective means of support. I do not see a lot of difference in facilitating male groups or female groups. I follow the same curriculum because the issues are the same. And when we talk about the same topics, obviously have to change some things, but they engage just like women. Males come to group with more stigmas than women, and some difference in the conversation may arise, but that is the case from any group to group. It is interesting to me the number of people, whether the public or even some trained advocates, who when talking about male support groups immediately have their thoughts turned to the idea are these offenders. I have a very clear point on that. So it is important for all advocates to remember that, yes, some victims do become perpetrators, and some perpetrators have been victimized. Much Like it is true that some victims become addicted to drugs and alcohol, engage in self-harming behaviors, or have sleeping disturbance. Supporting male survivors does not mean that we're working with offenders. All male victims do not become perpetrators. But if that happens to be the issue in their life, whether ideation or actual acting out, that person's still a victim of sexual assault and needs support in order to heal from the pain that has caused disruption in his life. Remembering to guard against any biases that we might have regarding males due to the nature of our work is of utmost importance in order to be an effective advocate. So that's just my point of view. So, okay, before questions and answers, I just want to touch base on our support groups. Like I said, we have the same curriculum as women's support group. It's not easy to approach men, Latino men. I find that machismo in our community, it's a very, very high issue in the community. Most of the men that we've been working with are only age 20 to probably 30. In the first conference, we had men over 35 and 42. And that was their first very time talking about sexual abuse in their childhood. So it is not easy to go out there. And as a woman, it's not easy to go out there and talk about sexual abuse because they don't feel comfortable with us. We have to have in the office or in your office someone that maybe a man or even on brochures have pictures of men so they can feel welcome, they can feel safe. Have an environment where they can come in and talk to you, where they don't feel judged, where they feel that it's a safe space for them to start talking about it. And confidentiality, it's a big, big thing that we have to take care of.
Okay. Any questions? All right, again, as a reminder to continue to type in your questions. Continue to use the chat or the question box to type in any questions. Again, Gina's contact information is there, and you can get more information about UNIDOS on their website, or you can contact her directly. Thank you, Gina. And Gina's actually going to have to sneak out, so speak now, or you don't get your questions answered. They have a big event going on today, so thank you for taking some time today to share your expertise. Is there a question? All right, we got a question.
How long do your groups meet and are they closed? Yes, this is, they meet for 2 hours. So first we do introductions, then we touch base on rules and confidentiality. Then we go over the activity that we're going to do, and it usually takes 2 hours. We say 1 hour and a half, but it takes 2 hours. It is a close. Sometimes we started as a closed group. Right now, I know it's going to change. Veronica wants to be this an open group, but we used to. I only have done closed groups. So we meet with them at the office, and we talk a little bit about what is to participate in support groups, and then we invite it to support groups.
Great. We've got a few more questions. So, Peter?
What do males usually say is a good support for them when going through the recovery process?
When they feel comfortable. I had a client that didn't feel comfortable even working with men or even talking to men. And after coming to support group, it was a huge challenge for him to even sit next to a man. So once he participated in the group and he learned about other people sharing their story, he became more comfortable. So that's something that helped him listening from others that experience.
We have another question. How have you advertised for your male groups?
We took pictures of men in the flyers, of course. We don't advertise it as a sexual assault group. We do put like, come and learn more about about maybe taboos in the community, and then we will list the words like domestic violence or, you know, sexual aggression. We don't word it out as sexual abuse, and in Spanish it's different, but we don't use that specific word.
Okay, we have another question. What kind of specific services can UNIDOS offer for kids who were sexually abused in the past?
We have a youth group. We have a youth advocate right now, and we are providing support groups, or no, it's called Voces Unidas, and high schools. So they meet once a week, and our youth advocate is working with youth that have been sexual assaulted.
And who is the best person to get in contact if they have a specific person that they're dealing with? Should they contact you?
Yes, they
Okay.
could contact me.
So Gina's contact information will be on the recording, and
Yes.
I'll send it out too. Would you accept someone from another country if they're willing to travel to your group?
Yes,
County.
definitely.
Sorry,
Yeah,
county.
country. No.
It's a whole new level of outreach there, yeah.
Yes, why not?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Okay, are there any other questions? Thank you, everyone who asked questions. That's great.
Okay, super.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gina. All right, and now we are going to move on to Michael Munson, who is joining us from Milwaukee, from Forge. And so we're just going to take a second here to get that switched over, and we'll hand it over to Michael.
Great, thanks, Kelly. And I'm hoping that the screen share is actually up and running because I can't see what everybody else is seeing.
It is. We're good.
Perfect.
Looks good.
Good deal. So thanks, Kelly and WCASA for having this webinar on male survivors, and we always are excited to partner with WCASA in any way that we can, because I think we have very similar missions and similar pushes to get info out there. So thanks for the opportunity. Let me start with just a little bit about who Forge is, since some of you probably don't know who we are and what we do. We're a transgender organization that is national in our range and our reach, and we do mostly work with service providers, victim service providers, and a little bit of our time is spent doing direct services with transgender and non-binary survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking, and other related crimes. So let me share just a couple of things about our background and our foundational principles. We kind of do all of our work under two foundational principles, and it really guides our work. So when we're engaging with both survivors and providers, our first goal is to approach this work through a trauma-informed lens. The second foundational principle, again, in how we work both with survivors and with providers, is to focus on empowerment through highlighting resilience, building on existing knowledge, and promoting a sense of confidence. I kind of, am shy about pushing out social media links, but we want to share our social media with you because social media is social, and it's our primary way that we can share new publications, new trainings, new events, and we can also connect with you all and enhance, upraise your voices as well. So please find us on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Let me give you just a little bit of a snapshot about what we offer. So again, we work predominantly with victim service providers, and most of what we do with victim service providers is training and technical assistance. We also write a fair number of publications, both short little fact sheets as well as really long guides. We've done some site visits, so when people really want to get more in depth about how to better serve trans or non-binary survivors. We have staff that works on policy, both on the national level as well as state and local. And we do a lot of referrals to connect providers with people in their communities that can better help their trans clients. For trans clients, we also offer a bunch of publications that are, everything that we offer for clients is virtual, so it's online, it's through the phone. We also offer peer-to-peer connection for folks. A survivors blog is going to be rolling out really soon, specifically for trans survivors. And we offer a lot of information and referral and support to survivors across the country. I wanted to highlight just two things before we get into the substance of what I'd like to share with you today. And the first highlight is around our webinars. So like WCASA, we record our webinars, and we have over 50 hours of free webinars for you all to listen to, learn, use in your teams, to train, and then talk about. So a couple of them I wanted to highlight for you are, we've got a really nice basic Trans Survivors, a 101 for Advocates. we worked with the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs and did violence against women non-discrimination conditions, which might be really helpful around when we're looking at male survivors and what kind of non-discrimination provisions we all have to work under. Another one that might be of interest to folks is forensic exams. And then a couple months ago, we did a webinar with the Washington Coalition, Washington State Coalition on trans youth and sexual assault. So lots of options for different kinds of webinars. We also have some survivor resources, and we're really thrilled that in the last year we were finally able to put out 4 really long and substantial guides for trans survivors, for partners of trans survivors, and for trans community members. And one of the exciting things is that within a longer guide we were able to talk about things like the anatomy of trauma and neurobiology, and some things that have a really trans-specific lens to that work. So we encourage you to look at those both for your clients as well as possibly for you to better understand where trans survivors are coming from. So I'm really excited to be able to share with you today a little bit of a sneak preview of some research that we did in 2016, and it's on gender-integrated support groups. So again, this is just a little sneak preview, and hopefully it will excite you as much as it excites me. We were funded through Reliance, which is funds that were coming through the National Football League. So gives me hope that sports can actually do something really great. So as many of you know, support groups for sexual assault survivors have historically been for women only, specifically for non-transgender women. In recent years, some groups, like Gina was just mentioning, have developed male support groups. Usually they're intended for non-trans men. As we know, though, sexual assault can happen to men and transgender people at similar, if not higher rates than non-transgender women. But we often continue to deny group support to people who are of other genders other than non-trans women. So I know most of you on the call probably know the benefits of group support, but I wanted to just highlight a couple of the places that we see group support as being really beneficial in addition to or instead of individual therapy or self-help modalities. So we definitely see that there's a decrease in post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms when there's group support, and it oftentimes shortens the duration of PTSD. Group support can also help individuals develop skills that help with their healing from sexual assault and abuse. It can provide community and connection with other survivors, which sometimes that alone can be tremendously meaningful for survivors. Group support can also dispel myths by allowing survivors to hear other people's stories and struggles and triumphs. Group support can obviously reduce isolation just by the very nature of being in the same space with other survivors. And groups can validate what survivors have lived through and support their healing process, normalizing the steps that they're taking along the way. So those are some of the obvious benefits that we see in support groups, and that sometimes is not available to people other than non-trans women. Forge really strongly believes that it's critical for organizations and providers to move towards creating and facilitating all gender support groups for a couple of different reasons. First reason is that men, trans individuals, and non-binary people experience sexual violence and deserve access to support groups. We feel that all survivors deserve the opportunity to benefit from this type of healing. As stigma around sexual assault shifts in our culture, more male survivors are seeking services. Likewise, just as more providers are increasing their cultural competency and knowledge and awareness of trans individuals, more trans survivors are also seeking services. As non-binary populations grow, and non-binary populations really are growing quite rapidly, more non-binary survivors will be seeking group support as well. And one thing to note with non-binary survivors, of course, is that if groups are just for men or just for women, non-binary folks can't bring their full selves into those groups. And of course, there's also a legal or policy reason that would encourage us to move in the direction of integrated groups. And those are the non-discrimination provisions, like those in the Violence Against Women Act or HHS or many other federal or state funders or institutions that require organizations to offer equal services to people of all genders. So a little snapshot about the project that we did in this year. We're in the middle of the year. We collected data through an online survey, and we were looking for some support group facilitators who had conducted groups that were for all genders or were integrated in some way around gender. We had 97 responses, so not a huge number, but some really, really rich responses in those 97. We asked folks if they would be interested in being interviewed, and about a fifth of those people, around 20%, said yes, that they would be interviewed, and we had some really lovely interviews that resulted in a lot of interesting information. Some of the outputs of this project are the creation of a guide for facilitators to creating gender-integrated groups. So that will be out in probably May or June, and then in June we'll be presenting at the National Sexual Assault Coalition, no, not the National Sexual Assault Conference in Dallas, specifically on this project, and then we'll be following up with a webinar that will help facilitators learn about what's in the guide as well as some practical skills and solutions. What we've found in our research is that the core and overwhelming result of the survey and the interviews is that gender-integrated support groups are easy. It really isn't a big deal to do gender integration. Some groups started out and have remained gender-integrated, while others have emerged over time. For all, though, it proved that doing gender-integrated support groups were easy and beneficial both to survivors and to staff. Many agencies have expanded their support groups in ways that are inclusive of all genders of survivors. So they haven't expanded their support groups out of fears or concerns or projections about what will happen if men and women are in the same group, or if men, women, and trans people are all in the same group. What we found, though, are that some of those main concerns that facilitators had ended up being more myths than truths. So I'd like to share with you 4 common concerns or worries or assumptions that many people had about gender integration in support groups, and also then share with you some experiences of seasoned facilitators who've been running those groups that kind of counter those assumptions. So there's a widely held belief that women will feel unsafe around men. So people who work with anti-sexual violence organizations and systems often are exceptionally mindful of being aware of people's feelings and trying to create as safe as possible of a support structure. So let's look at this assumption first, that women will feel unsafe around men in support groups, by taking a peek at what support group facilitators said who do run integrated groups. In reality, gender-integrated support group facilitators remind us that not all perpetrators are male, so blanket statements that women will feel unsafe around men won't hold true if she's had a female offender. That assumption may also scare away women whose perpetrators were female, or anybody whose perpetrator was female, who might fear other group members or that facilitators will deny their experiences or stigmatize them. For those people who did have a male offender, being in a group that is created to be safe and structured can really be healing, seeing that not all men are dangerous. Integrated groups also allow for group members to see the commonalities of survivorship, which can, in and of itself, be one way to create a sense of safety and unity and healing. So for each of these assumption experience pairs, I'd like to share a quick quote from the survey or interviews with you. So this first quote says, "Survivors can be hesitant to engage in a group that includes members of the gender that hurt them. But we have discussed that as an opportunity to communicate about concerns and boundaries and rebuild trust with others." So a second assumption that is often made is that groups that are comprised of many genders of survivors, that they need to have both a male and a female co-facilitator structure. And the reality, of course, is that there are more than 2 genders. So some support groups have always had more than one facilitator, but the gender of those facilitators is likely far less important than the skills in creating a place where survivors can heal and learn and grow. Keep in mind, too, that gender is just one of many, many, many attributes that survivors bring to the group. So a quote around this pair is, "If you feel like your facilitators need to represent every single identity of your group members, then you're going to need as many facilitators as you have group members, and probably more, because there's not going to be a complete representation, and because I believe there are infinite gender identities." So a third common assumption is that facilitators need cultural competency training. Well, cultural competency training is essential and it's important across many areas. Facilitators who work with survivors will strengthen their effectiveness as clinicians or advocates if they enhance their knowledge about gender, about sexual orientation, about race, about age, about class, about disability, about religion, as well as learning more about things like trauma and neurobiology or alternative healing modalities or adult learning techniques, and so much more. It's also incredibly important for facilitators to address their own biases or phobias. This is important before facilitating as well as something to be constantly aware of. More important and specific cultural competency training, though, is training on active listening. When facilitators can listen fully and be present without judgment, clients will feel heard and validated. So a quote for this one, facilitators have to be open, humble, and well-versed in issues that may come up, and well-versed in people that don't identify in the same way that they do. So the last assumption and experience I'd like to share with you today is the belief that there needs to be more than one of each identity in a group for people to feel comfortable or able to feel included. The reality is that every person has thousands of identities. There's literally no way that a group could be comprised of people who all had the same or similar identities. What many support group leaders are finding is that sometimes the contrast between individuals in a group can actually help people see how they're alike, for example, in their survivorship, in their resilience, or in their ability to learn skills to heal from trauma. Here's what one leader said. One group I facilitated was all female and one transgender male. He expressed his initial concern about fear of not fitting in, but at the end of the first session, he no longer had fear and felt comfortable. The core and overwhelming result of the survey and the interviews that we conducted, as well as our discussions with agencies across the country, is that gender-integrated support groups are easy. It really isn't a big deal. And I really want to stress that because I think people fear that it's going to be very difficult. And what people are finding is that it's not difficult. Some groups started out and remain gender integrated, while others have emerged over time. For all, though, it's proved to be easy and beneficial both to survivors and to staff. Let me leave you with one last quote. And the quote says, "There are so many different experiences, so many different identities, and everybody deserves to feel safe. So if we're not part of that solution, then we're part of the problem. So I would hope that people would want to be part of the solution." And just a quick reminder of where folks can find us and find more resources. Our website address is on the top of this slide, so forge-forward.org. And we encourage you to come hang out on our website and again, find us on social media so that we can connect with you and learn from each other. Thanks very much for having me be part of this section.
Hey, thanks, Michael. This is Kelly. Can you just, we've got a couple of questions. First of all, how exciting that we got a sneak peek of something that's not even out yet, so that's really exciting. The information you talked about the webinar and things, will that information come out through, like announcements will come out through your agency after the national conference?
Yes, it definitely will. So if people want to connect with us on social media, it will be pushed out that way as well as on our direct email list. Okay,
great. Thank you. Another question?
Yeah, we do have a question. Do you provide services in Spanish?
We do not. We don't do a lot of direct services, but we've definitely done trainings where things have been interpreted.
If anyone has any other questions, type them in quick. Otherwise, Michael's contact information is right there.
And we can start the process of switching back over.
Yes.
Michael, you're going to be able to hang with us for a little while?
I sure will, yes.
Okay. So if you have additional questions for Michael as we continue through, you can use the chat and the question box to send those in, and we will keep track of them and have a little time for questions at the end as well. So we'll start transitioning here to Braden. Thanks everyone for your patience, and thanks Peter for handling all the tech.
Okay.
Right, Braden,
well, I wanted to say wow to Michael and the work over there that Forge Forward is doing. That's some really progressive and interesting work. And I'm just really honored and humbled to be a part of this, presenting with Gina and Michael and Callen. So thank you to WCASA. I've been asked to come and just talk about some of the work that I'm doing with male survivors of sexual assault up here in the Great North. So I want to talk a little bit especially about labels, and I'm going to probably fail my own test today when it comes to not using labels to address the specific group of men that I work with, the specific kind of subset of survivors that I've been working with, and that's survivors who have chosen to use mind-altering or body-altering substances to help mask, cope, and really deal with the trauma that has resulted from their sexual assault. So I'm going to try my best not to use words like addict, user, alcoholic, those kind of things, but again, I'll probably fail. So moving past survival. Not that Survivor, I think Survivor is a great progress that we've made in coming to Survivor from victim, but a lot of the men that I've worked with are kind of in this survival mode on a day-to-day basis, whether it is getting food, whether it is finding shelter, whether it is accumulating enough funds to get high. Usually it is staying busy enough or staying under the influence enough so they don't have to address, again, some of the trauma that they've experienced and being able to stay away from that. So I just want to talk a little bit about that. I put a quote up here. I thought since we were talking about male survivors, I would use my own little wordplay and put a quote up here from Les Stroud, the survivor man, is kind of my own personal joke. He talks a little bit about having healthy fear and how courage is having fear and facing that, knowing that it's going to be scary, that it's going to be hard, and that it's a challenge rather than going into something fearless and kind of giving ourselves the misconception that it's going to be easy, because for survivors, it isn't easy. It is challenging and it is scary, and that we should all remember that. I'm going to challenge everyone as well that if you haven't already heard something today incredibly inspirational or an idea or something thought-provoking that can help you get out there and work with male survivors, I'm sure Callen will be able to provide you with that. So try to take something away, because I know I can do more to provide outreach to male survivors. I know my agency could excel at outreach to male survivors and really continue to push this work forward. So the work I do is at a residential treatment center, and just a little bit of background about the facility and how I came into having groups with male survivors there. Koinonia is an inpatient residential treatment center with a 45-day program. A lot of the residents there are either incarcerated and spending their time there in lieu of some of their jail sentence. Some of them have been advised by their attorneys or public defenders to go and complete a treatment program before they are sentenced or before they meet with the prosecution to help their case and to alleviate some of the concerns that the court may have. So it really is a captive audience. A lot of the people are not there voluntarily. They're not there because they want to be. They're there because it's a better option than their other choices. So it provides me with kind of an interesting and challenging group to work with, because I don't necessarily expect people to seek continued advocacy services, to seek out continued groups after they exit the treatment center, and that's just trying to be realistic with my own expectations and with their expectations as well, is that success when it comes to becoming sober is very challenging, and like seeking out services, it usually doesn't happen on your first try. So 3 years ago, after a lot of the information about ACEs, about trauma and how it affects development, how it affects brain development and adolescent behavior, a coworker and myself decided to reach out to local counseling agencies, local psychologist office, therapy offices, and try to do some work with the professionals there, teaching them about what our services are, what we can provide for people that they're providing services to, and to kind of help hopefully keep them up to date on any information regarding being trauma informed that they weren't already aware of. So 3 years ago we met with the clinical staff at Koinonia, and through that meeting they decided to allow us to come in and facilitate a joint group with the entire residential unit there once every 45-day cycle. And we kind of took that and ran with it. For the first year, year and a half or so, we just met once every 45 days with that entire large group of everyone that was staying at the treatment facility. And one trend that I noticed throughout meeting there was that every single group I had, there was at least one, sometimes two, first-time sexual assault disclosures, usually people disclosing childhood sexual abuse. And it struck me as something that didn't happen with other presentations, with other groups that I had met with, that this really was an issue that was predominant in these people's lives, and that it was something that, in fairness to them, I think needed to be addressed in order to help them address the reasons that they had for seeking out drugs and alcohol to escape their trauma. So eventually we started saying, well, let's do follow-up groups. Let's meet with just some men if they're interested in talking further about their experiences. Let's meet with, some small groups of women and talk about their experiences. So not in a traditional group setting where there's a plan or a 6-month kind of curriculum, but just in a short time where I can have this captive audience and their attention while they're really focusing on the underlying trauma that is resulting in their using. Let's take advantage of that. I very specifically at the top here used the punctuation I did to say that sexual trauma is greater than addiction, which is greater than incarceration, that all these problems for these men are related, but that out of all of them, the sexual trauma they experienced is certainly at the root of these other issues, at the root of their addiction, at the root of the fact that they're involved in the justice system. I think for everyone that works with survivors, that does sexual assault prevention work, victim blaming is something that we're all very, very familiar with. And I think that it's kind of impactful twofold onto people who have chosen to use in order to cope with their trauma. I know that not all drug offenses are victimless crimes, but I do believe that all men, or almost all of the men I work with, none of them are distributors, none of them are drug dealers. They're just people who, again, are using substances to try to escape or try to mask the pain they feel. Ultimately, they are still the victims of the sexual trauma that they've experienced. Ultimately, they're still the victims of addictive substances that they've been using to try to hide this trauma and mask this trauma, and that they still need to be viewed as not again to use the label, but as victims to this, and that every one of these men at some point has been told by a judge, by law enforcement, by prosecutors, by family, by friends, this is your fault. You did this to yourself. You made bad decisions, and this is what happens when you make bad decisions. If you wouldn't have done A, B, and C, you wouldn't be in this position. And it shocked me that there were some parallels there between victim blaming with victims of sexual abuse and victim blaming with individuals who have chosen to use substances to escape. Again, I talked about labels at the beginning, and that's another big thing with victims of survivors of sexual assault, is the labels that are applied to them. Labels have been used for decades, millennia, to either bring people as part of a group, to make it inclusive of people, or to exclude people from that group. Generally, human beings have a desire to be wanted, to be part of a larger group, to be accepted as a larger group. And labels can really help to facilitate that, or labels can really help to push people outside of that larger accepted group. So using labels like alcoholic, criminal, user. You know, it helps to separate someone who's an addict versus someone who isn't. And generally, in our society, we use someone who's an addict as someone who's negative, someone who's on the outside. And I think that labels really minimize someone's experience. Even in, you know, group meetings, let's say NA, not to rain on anyone's parade because the work they do really is important. But, you know, for people to say, and I have group members who have raised their hands and said, you know, my name's Joe and I'm an alcoholic. Well, and I think that, you know, they're being honest with themselves, but that minimizes their experience. I'm an alcoholic doesn't tell the whole story. I started drinking when I was 14 years old because it was a way to escape the fact that I was being sexually abused at home. And I've continued drinking ever since then, and now I can't stop. I think that tells an experience. Saying I'm an alcoholic doesn't give people the view of that experience. So to really try to step away as much as we can from those labels. So one of the things I like to do in the group that I work with is have everyone write down on a piece of paper positive and negative labels that they experience. Because a lot of times people label themselves as father. That's an experience that's fairly common with the men I work with, so they have families and they take pride in the fact that they're fathers. They might not take pride in the way they've parented, but they do take pride in being fathers. So to write down positive and negative labels and to talk about how those labels make us feel, and then to discard the labels that we don't find desirable, that we don't like being put with. And as that activity happens, as people discard the labels that they've been given, usually by other people, you feel this trust. And again, this isn't a long course. This is, you know, one usually. Maybe if I'm lucky, I'll have 2 chances to meet with these individuals. But you can feel the trust building, not with just me as the advocate, as the facilitator, but with the other members of the group as well, to say, you know, I've been labeled as that as well. I have that same label. And those labels that are used to cast people out are the same things that are then bringing them together. So like I said, I know I've already failed and used some labels to describe some of the people that I work with and some of the experiences they have, but I've really tried to make a conscious effort to talk more about people's experiences and not just use a label to summarize something that is much larger than just one word. The most important step for a lot of these individuals, a lot of the men, is to do the work. They have a small window, unfortunately, in many cases, of sobriety that they actively were using before either incarceration or coming to treatment, and in all actuality and reality, once they leave incarceration or treatment, they're going to start actively using again. That's just the reality. They know it. I have to accept it as reality. So in that window, it's important that, you know, when the wall is down, when there is no escape mechanism there, and they're feeling vulnerable, that there's other resources besides just an advocate, besides just a group. I think Michael touched on it, Gina touched on it. There's a moment of vulnerability, especially when working with sexual assault survivors, that I think really defines a relationship that you're going to have with them. There's kind of that defining moment where someone feels the most vulnerable, and how we are in that moment and how we respond in that moment, I think really sets the tone for the nature of the relationship moving forward with that individual. And to be aware that that moment can come anytime, so that we're always kind of not on our toes because we don't want to be uptight, but you know, that we're always in the same comfortable space, in the same accepting, non-judgmental space. So the people that I see that are the most successful are the people that really do the work. They seek out further therapy, professional therapy. They seek out spirituality. They might get back in touch with their Christian values. At Koinonia, a lot of the residents are from either the Forest County Potawatomi, the Mole Lake Sikagan, or the Lacto Flambeau tribes. I would say about 40% of their patients there, when our service area only has 11% of a Native American population. So I think that speaks to a whole nother range of issues, but to seek out, some sort of spiritual guidance as well is important, regardless of what kind of religion one identifies with, or if someone identifies with a religion at all. Success through structure. We see this a lot with clients, and specifically with the individuals, the men, who are having this experience, who are working through the system, is that it's either been 6 months, 3 months, a year, multiple years where their life has had a lot of structure. They wake up at a certain time, their day is planned out, they go to bed at a certain time. In the restaurant industry, we used to have the saying, time to lean, time to clean. Any free time, any downtime, you could be doing something else. With a lot of the people, the men that I've worked with who choose to use alcohol and drugs to escape, downtime to them is time that they either need to be busy or they need to be under the influence, because that's time that they're usually dwelling, thinking, experiencing pain, suffering. So that having that structure, not only because it's something they're used to, but because it's something that continues to drive them forward, is important. To continue to help them be accountable. If it's someone you continue to work with, or you continue to have in group, to help have the group hold them accountable as well. To say, did you go to the drug treatment facility? Did you go down to Wausau this week? Did you go see your therapist? Why not? Is there something we can do to help you if you didn't go? Is there something you need to work through with us if you didn't go? I think that transitional housing is, honestly, all in all, is a good thing. It puts people in the surroundings of other people who really have the will to succeed, who are really trying voluntarily to succeed and reintegrating and becoming sober. And to touch base on the reintegration part, this is really the thing that has been impactful to me, and I understand it needs to be done responsibly. But it's reintegrating a lot of these people. Again, so a lot of the men I've worked with, one of the things they positively identify with is being a father. That being a parent is very, very important to them, and that reconnecting with their family is something that's on the top of their priority list. But it's something that might be very challenging. They might have lost most, if not all, of their parental rights due to the struggles that they have with substances. And they might have alienated their families. They might have alienated the person that they're parenting with. And it might be hard for them to rebuild that relationship. We're lucky to have some family-based programming here in our area that's very structured. So I can refer the men to join the Strengthening Families program provided by the health department, and to have structured activities with their children, even if it's just once a week for a few hours. They can have those structured activities. They don't have to question what they should be doing, what they're not doing. Someone else is saying, okay, this is what we're doing, now you go do it with your children. And I don't get to know the end of the story for a lot of these individuals, but I know that at least one of them, probably a couple of them have been attending the Strengthening Families programs regularly and really making an effort to reintegrate with their families. And that's, I think, incredibly important, is that these men who identify as fathers are moving past and trying to overcome their trauma to incorporate themselves back in the next generation and pass along the lessons that they've learned. Child advocacy centers, even, I know a lot of times that we can associate probation and parole, child advocacy centers, any sort of supervised visitation as, well, if the father has supervised visitation, it's because he's a threat to the child and we should be cautious. But I think those are really good opportunities for outreach. Probation and parole is a great opportunity for outreach to male survivors. Child advocacy centers, if you have one that does supervised visitation for parents, is a great opportunity to do outreach for male survivors. Not everyone has lost their parental rights because of abuse. Some people have lost them simply because they couldn't stop themselves or didn't choose to stop themselves from using to hide their pain, and that's why they've lost connection. But it doesn't mean they don't deserve love and respect that they don't deserve services and that they don't deserve to get together and you know, kind of work through their trauma with other men and with other professionals as well, and help them continue to reconnect with their families. Employment and education is another big thing. Again, keeping that structure for people, and that has a lot more to do with sobriety than it does, I think, normally working with just sexual assault survivors. But in this subset, helping them stay sober is helping them work through their core problems, and that's really the priority. I want to thank again everyone. I will be around till the end for questions. I don't really think I have any more. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to work with men. It's really opened my mind up that, as Michael said, regardless of gender identity and in that gender binary even, the experiences are very, very similar between men and women and how they deal with it. But we could always do a little bit more to reach out to male survivors and gender non-binary survivors as well. So thank you again.
Thanks, Braden. That was really, really great. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for sticking around. Again, a reminder to type in your questions. We have a few that we'll take right now, and then if you have additional questions, we can also hold some for the end as well. So, Peter?
So would it be also a challenge if the person were sex offender registered? Braden, are you still there?
Oh.
We might have lost.
Okay, well, we'll hold those questions until the end, and we will we'll transition to Kalyn, and then we can ask some of those other questions. We'll hold those. So if you sent questions, we'll get to them, and we'll try manage the issues here and get Braden back on with us. But to keep things moving, I am really happy to turn things over to Kalyn Hardy, who is also in the space here with us here in the WCASA office. And Kalyn is a wonderful partner and activist on male survivor issues. He's an author, and we couldn't be happier to have him join us. So I'm just going to turn it over to Kalyn.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, WCASA, for putting on this webinar, and for all the folks attending, and for the other speakers. So normally when I do a speaking engagement, I'll talk for half an hour, hour and a half about my experiences as a male survivor. Today's webinar was geared more toward the things that organizations are doing for male survivors. I'm not an organization. In fact, I'm very disorganized sometimes. But I do have some things that I've been doing that I wanted to talk about. I will take a moment to do sort of a Reader's Digest condensed version of my survivor story. When I was 10 years old, I was sexually abused by my oldest brother, and that went on for about 7.5 years, repeatedly, different times, even after he moved out of the house and was married, when he'd come home to visit, that kind of thing. So that was very difficult, and as Braden was talking about, I spent about 11 years of my life in an alcoholic haze, using drugs and alcohol to mask the pain that was going on underneath everything. I finally quit drinking April 18th, 1989. It's been quite a few years now. Very proud of that. And once I did that, I was able to start getting my life together little by little. And about 8 years ago, I'm an actor also, besides being a writer, and I was on stage in the middle of an opening night performance and had a heart attack. And a heart attack will often, a heart attack or any life-threatening experience, and there's 100% blockage in my left coronary, so it was definitely a life-threatening experience. Those kinds of things will often make you rethink your life, what you're doing with it, what you need to do yet, you know, what things are important and not important in your life. So a couple years later, I ended up writing a play called Invisible Boy, and it was my way of dealing with my childhood sex abuse. It was an autobiographical play about the abuse, about finding my way through it, and for me, about finding forgiveness. That doesn't work for everybody, but it was important to me. So I wrote that play, and it was produced at Broome Street Theater in 2010. And when we did the play, we invited several local organizations to come in, Rape Crisis Center, Men Stopping Rape, I can't remember who all, but they had people there to be able to talk to folks afterwards, because parts of the play could be very triggering. So a lot of people would write me letters out of the blue. I'd get an email saying, thank you so much for sharing your story. Because of you, I'm looking at my own life now, those kinds of things. So I realized how important it was to share one's story. As a gay man who grew up in the times of Harvey Milk, as the name of the movie is called, Harvey Milk used to always say that the only way we would ever get our rights as queer people was once all of us came out. Because he understood that once people realized that their brothers, their sons, their neighbors, their co-workers, that every one of them knew somebody who was gay, then they would not stand for unequal treatment under the law. And I've carried that over in my activist work with sexual assault. I understand that when people come out as sexual abuse survivors, then other people start realizing, oh my God, that's my neighbor, that's my sister, that's my father who was sexually abused, and I need to do something about it too. So we get allies as well as doing the work ourselves. So that's one of the main reasons I share my story as widely as I do. I have a lot of ways that I do that, and a lot of things that I do as a survivor activist, and I'm going to share some of those here. One is that I have a blog. It's called The Single Bluebird. If you don't like politics, you might want to avoid it because many of my blog posts are politically charged, but many of them are also about my survival as a child sex abuse survivor. Some of them are about my mother, who's 92 and bedridden and not doing well. Some of them are about love. I posted a Valentine's one today. But there are many blog posts on there that you can find about sexual assault and about surviving. I started the blog back in 2012 during the height of the Jerry Sandusky trial, because that was really affecting me. I was really distraught by what happened to those children, and I needed a forum to talk about that. So several of the early blog posts in there are about that. And as many of you probably know, one of Sandusky's adopted sons was arrested yesterday for abusing young girls as well. So that's, at the end of this, there's a resource listing that I have that WCASA can distribute to anybody who wants it. Or if you want to email me, I can get it to you as well. My email address is up on the screen there. So that is available. It's called A Single Bluebird. It's through WordPress. Back in 2012, I got an email from a group called Male Survivor, which is an international organization dedicated to helping male survivors. One of the awesome groups that is focused in that direction. But in the email, they were talking about a film that they had available that they could take places, and they would do a talk along with it. And I thought, wow, that's cool. That should be brought to Madison. So I contacted them, and I said, hey, I'd like to bring this film to Madison and your speakers, and how much would it cost, and what do I need to do to make this happen? And the woman at Male Survivor wrote me back, and she said, well, normally people don't do things like this themselves. You might want to contact some local organizations that deal with sexual assault and see if they can help you out. So I did contact as many as I could find locally here, and several of them responded. And one of them was Rape Crisis Center, Dane County Rape Crisis Center. And the executive director at the time, Kelly Anderson, said to me, well, if we're going to spend money to bring the film here, we should just do an all-day thing. And being naive and not knowing any better, I said, sure, why not? Let's do a conference. And so I contacted several other groups, including WCASA. So WCASA jumped on board right away, Canopy Center, Proud Theater, several other organizations. And so we started this annual conference called Paths to Healing. It's a conference on surviving child sex abuse with a focus on male survivors. This is our 5th year doing it. We've had some great keynote speakers and excellent presenters throughout. The last couple of years we had we had David Lisak one year. This year we are going to have, spacing his name right now, Corey Ingram, MSW. He works at the University of North Carolina. He works with male survivors and he works with men on masculinity issues and that kind of thing. We're very excited to have him. We are also working on setting the other presenters as well. And WCASA is currently, and all of us who are sponsoring this, are currently seeking presenters. So if you're interested in that, well, we have a form you can fill out. Peter can send that out to folks as well. Some of you are doing work with your organization, so if you have work that you're doing, a couple of the presenters here today, if you're interested, let us know. It would be awesome to have you. So we are working now on finalizing the speakers and everything for that. It's going to be Thursday, June 22nd here in Madison at the Crown Plaza. Sign up will be available on the WCASA website shortly. So that's a really exciting thing that I'm involved with and that I hope people come and be a part of. Some of the helpful organizations nationwide that I talked about, Male Survivor is one of them. There's an organization called 1 in 6, and then Peaceful Hearts Foundation, which was founded by one of Jerry Sandusky's sons, Matt Sandusky, who was abused by Jerry Sandusky as a child. So those are some of the organizations online nationally. They have support groups, they have books and resources, and again, the websites for those are listed on that resource page that's going to be available. I do a lot of public speaking. I've been doing that since June of 2013. Much of it through WCASA. They've invited me to many different events. I've also spoken for 1 Billion Rising. I spoke at Male Survivors International Conference in New Jersey a couple years ago. Iowa County Social Services. You know, if people are interested, my contact information is on there. I am happy to come speak about male survivors. Often men are afraid to speak, as Gina talked about, because of shame, because of various issues around masculinity, because of fearing that you might be gay, fearing, you know, internalized homophobia as well. So I'm happy to speak about those issues and those things to any group that might be interested in that. I'm also involved in 1 in 6 has a project called Bristlecone Project. And there's a lot of these kinds of projects around the country. There's some for men, some for women, probably some for transgender folks as well. Actually, I know Forge has one for transgender folks as well, where there are photographs of individuals who are sexual assault survivors along with short biographies. So the Bristlecone Project will do shows, gallery shows, with these portraits and the biographies. They also have it available online. That website is also going to be available on the resource page. And then, as Kelly mentioned, I'm a writer. I've written 3 books so far, 2 of them on this issue. My play Invisible Boy just was released in book format this past year in December. And a year before that, I wrote a memoir called Empty Playground, The Survivor's Story, which details my growing up in southwestern Wisconsin and surviving that sexual assault from my brother, and talks about, you know, getting past that and where I am now. So I think that's about all I have to talk about. I'm open to any questions and answers, as the other folks are. So I'm happy to answer any questions people might have.
Thanks, Kalyn. And Kalyn's not joking when he says that he does lots of stuff for WCASA, so we do really appreciate all the work he's done to engage initially the Madison community, but Paths to Healing has really grown into a statewide conference that we're really proud to be a part of. And again, those were the ideas and the activism of Kalyn who got that going. So we do genuinely appreciate everything you do for us and for this issue and this topic across the state. So I am going to turn things over to Peter, who's managing the questions, and we'll get some of your questions answered.
So Kalyn, first, as a male survivor, what stood out to you the most in processing your trauma once you dealt with your addiction too?
I didn't realize that my addiction was related to my abuse until after I quit drinking, and I was able to then start piecing parts of my life together. And it's a very difficult process, as you know, if you've worked with any kind of survivor, to try to start piecing those things together. I believe Gina, the first speaker, mentioned that on average men take 20 years or longer to come to terms with their abuse and start working towards survival. Mine took even longer than that. I didn't start really dealing with it till I was in my 50s. So I think I didn't realize that my bad behaviors, my suicidal ideation, my alcohol and drug abuse, I didn't realize that those things were masking something really deep underneath, and that I had to deal with that. And once I stopped taking drugs, which was a couple years before the alcohol, and once I quit the alcohol, then little light bulbs started going off in my head, and I started checking in a little bit about those things. Hopefully that answers that question for you.
Thanks.
And if you have questions for Kalyn, just type it in your question or chat box.
Questions for Kalyn or Michael, or do we have Braden back on too?
I hope so.
Oh, there he is. Okay.
Yay!
So questions for, Gina has left, but if you have questions for Michael, Kalyn, or Braden, please feel free to type those in. There was a question for Braden that we skipped, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Braden, would it be challenging if the person were sex offender registered?
Yes. I can't give you the definitive 100% answer to that without talking to Karen more. But my understanding is that would be incredibly challenging given the requirements of some of our funders through SAVES funding.
I should admit, while you were talking, Braden, that I disassociated for a moment while you were talking about the alcohol and drug abuse of the people you work with. I thought that was interesting. I just want to wait for a little bit. And that still happens these days.
And I know that's something, Kalyn, that people that I'm close to still experience as well. Especially in this line of work, we've come across people that we're trying to help that we see a lot of ourselves or our own experiences in, and we struggle with going back to those places of using and escaping. So thank you for sharing your story, though. It's always amazing to hear you talk.
One person just wants to say hello to Braden. And then there was a question, two questions for Michael. We're just about beginning to offer group therapy for adult survivors and had planned to offer separate male and female groups beginning in April. Do you have any particular suggestions before our educational materials come out?
How about combining them and having all gender groups? That's not a very satisfying answer, probably. If and I know that. Is there more clarity on the question? Because it's a broad question.
That was all. If you could type more to clarify.
But in all seriousness, I really do encourage folks to think about why there's a separation of groups and what purpose that holds to have two different types of groups based on gender. Is there some other characteristic that might be more useful if there needs to be two separate groups?
And I actually have a kind of a question about that, Michael. I was wondering, because it is such a new philosophy and format for running groups, I'm assuming you kind of foresee that there's going to be some hesitancy and maybe some resistance. How would you suggest getting over that when you're talking to either victims or the facilitators? What would be the steps that you would take to kind of override the assumptions that we all have?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's really good, because I think one of the things that oftentimes happens is people are more fearful about what's going to happen because we've done it this way for a really long time, this way meaning women only or men only. And so I think, sometimes you have to just jump in the pool, and I don't mean to be sarcastic about that, but sometimes once you're in the pool you realize, oh, this is not so bad to have everybody together. But we know that doing things like having good group structures, like having ground rules and having, making the connections for folks that everybody's there because they're a survivor, that can be really helpful to people, because I think sometimes people forget forget why they're there. So if you help people remember why they're there, which is because they all want to heal or because they're struggling, that can help kind of just, you know, erase some of those boundary lines around gender or about any other kind of perceived difference among survivors.
Great. Thanks, Michael.
Michael, does Forge offer interpretation in Hmong?
We don't. I know that when we've done interpretation before, we haven't done it directly, but we've worked with other organizations that have interpreters. So basically the answer is no, but I know that there are services that can help with doing those translation pieces.
Thank you. And then we have some questions for Kalyn. I'm working with a 17-year-old male. He is very angry and he does not want to be involved much with what's going on in court. What is your advice for me on how to get through to him?
Oh boy, that is a very tough question. I would want to try to find out what the resistance is there. Try to find out why he doesn't want to have much to do with court. And my guess is that he's not facing the abuse. You know, he doesn't want to look at it. And if he has to go to court, he has to look at it. And my guess would be that's where that resistance is coming from. So if you can help him work through the coming to terms with it, that may help. And that may make him understand why it is important to go to court, you know, and to testify if that's what's needed. Some people can't. Some people are going to be really uncomfortable with that. And I don't think that really has anything to do with age. I think it has to do with whether they're able to deal with what happened to them and how far along in that process they might be.
Thanks, Kalyn. I think it's important, too, to remember that survivors may define justice differently. And so oftentimes, especially when you're with a minor, they don't have a lot of voice and say and how those things are gonna proceed. And so, you know, exploring those things might be helpful as well to see what do they want to get out of this process. And you may not be able to give them to that because the criminal case is still going to proceed, but at least exploring them and giving some voice to that can also be helpful. Other questions, Peter?
This person also asked, how can I make a connection with him? With the survivor?
If they're the therapist, well, I would hope there's a connection there. If they're not, then I don't know, you know, I don't know what I would need to know what their relationship is. If they can type that back, I could try to answer that. But, you know, if they're the therapist, then there should be a connection. If it's a relative or a friend or maybe somebody who the kid just came to at an organization, then I'm not sure. I think I would need to know that relationship, and the folks here at WCASA might be able to answer that better than I could, too.
She is a female advocate.
Female advocate. Okay. I think you would make the connection with him the way you would with any survivor. Again, I don't think the gender, I don't think the age matters. I think it's your compassionate listening that will matter, and letting him know that you care and that your ears are open and your heart is open.
Thank you. And I think that's, you know, maybe some of those assumptions that Michael talked about group. I think sometimes advocates feel that too, like, oh, I'm a female advocate working with a male client, or, you know, whatever the case may be. And I think we need to break those down, not just, you know, absolutely about some of the group issues, but also in providing services. And I think, you know, Kalyn's suggestion about, you know, just being there, you know, being there with them and opening your heart and providing services does take away all of those other things about gender and age and all of that. And hopefully that'll help make that connection. Looks like we're coming to close to the end of time. Any more questions, Peter? Are we okay? Well, thank you. I first want to say thank you so much to our speakers, Gina, Michael, Braden, and Kalyn. You know, we are really fortunate here at WCASA to have such amazing partners, both at our sexual assault service providers like UNIDOS and Tri-County, as well as with organizations like Forge, and especially with survivors like Kalyn. And I think we've done male survivor webinars in the past, and we were trying to think of a way to do that a little differently. And because of our wealth of experience and the richness of the work that's going on around the state. We were able to do that by pulling together some really great people. So I want to thank them first and foremost for sharing their stories, their experience, and really giving us some great ideas about how we can work to provide better services to all survivors. I encourage folks to seek out more information on this topic, and after the webinar we'll be sending out the recording along with some of the resources that our speakers have shared. You can always reach out to WCASA and let us know what we can do to help support your work. Moving forward, please keep an eye out for future webinars that Peter now has on the screen. So check out those dates. Registration information will be coming out before each event, so save the dates for now and you'll be getting more information. And thanks, as always, for joining us. It was a really great participation, large attendance, and great questions. So thank you for being a part of this, and thank you for the work that you do. Have a good day.